couple of armchair GMs who have yet to be wrong with any of their Timberwolves takes. Right. It's Flagrant Howls with Phil Mackey and Kyle Theige.
Yes, welcome into your favorite Minnesota Timberwolves lifestyle podcast, where we just want the Timberwolves to win 30 games. Oh wait, are we keeping it 50?
We just want the Timberwolves to win 3 games in a row before we die.
We just want the Timberwolves to not look like a disaster. Well, there's a lot of things to get into here today, my friend Kyle. We will, toward the end of the episode, we will go back into the comment section. Phil and Kyle read the comments, but the Timberwolves are sitting here after, I love every time they're on TNT. The thing I'm the most interested in is when they get to halftime, like, what is Charles Barkley or Shaq going to say about the team? Mm-hmm. And, of course, Barkley, I don't have it in front of me, but if I remember the quote right, he called them idiots for, yeah, of course. They're running 2 7-footers out there. They're idiots.
He said, he's like, I said this before, but I hated that trade. And I'm going to be honest with you, it actually made me like the trade more. Like, it was
that Barkley hates it?
The confirmation. I was like, oh, wait, Charles is on that side? Like, okay, good. That probably means it was a good trade. But, yeah, do you remember how they ripped apart? They did that graphic of, like, these dominant big men duos. It was, like, Duncan and Robinson and all these historic guys like McHale and Parrish. And then it was, like, Horford and Rob Williams and Carl and Rudy. And I think Charles and Shaq both had some things to say about that we can't repeat here. But, that's always a good time. I also, as good as Kevin Harlan is, and I know he's a legend here as well.
Oh, are you going to rip Kevin Harlan right now?
No. I love Kevin Harlan, but I'm really just... Every time we complain about not being on national TV enough, it's like, yeah, but that's more time that I don't get to hear Jim Pete talk. And it's like,
sure.
And I love Kevin Harlan, but you know what? I'm actually okay. Just put 82 of those on Bally. Let other people in the city actually access the Bally Sports Network. But I'm okay with no more televised games on ESPN. They don't watch the team anyway. So
yeah, aren't they on ESPN? Yeah, they're
Friday
on ESPN
against the Bucks.
Yes, so you're gonna get that perspective as well. I love me some Kevin Harlan, some googly oogly baby from the 90s. But I do, it is tough because Jim Pete is obviously, like, he is as plugged in and following as close as anyone, so he can kind of get into the nuance of why things are happening more. But let's you and I get into the nuance of why things are happening here as much as we can. You sent me this from my guy Jake's Graphs, who makes hilarious merchandise as well that you should go buy if you are a Wolves fan. And he took a snippet from an NBA.com article. I think this was kind of a 10-year look back.
Yep.
So this is published 8 years ago. And it's a 10-year look back at the greatest Timberwolves team of all time. And we've referenced this team a few times here on Flagrant Howls as sort of a barometer for how much time you have to give a team to gel before you can start really wringing your hands. And I've probably been a little guilty of jumping that gun here just with some of the things we've seen. Shocker. But that team started 9-8. That team was just kind of toiling back and forth between a couple wins here and then a couple losses, 2 steps forward, step back. And it looked and felt kind of clunky. And I do remember, 20 games into that season, just watching as a gigantic fan, thinking, oh, man, this is not going as well as we thought, right? They made these big acquisitions. They finally put some professionals around Kevin Garnett, some established, known all-star caliber players in Cassell and Sprewell, and here they are just kind of floating around 500 at the bottom end of the bracket. And here's the write-up. And as I read this, for the audience and for Kyle, you sent this to me, so you've already read this, but there are parallels potentially to be drawn with this team. And so here's a snippet. Flip Saunders called a meeting in his office that featured Kevin Garnett, Latrell Sprewell, and Sam Cassell late in November of that 2003-2004 season. This group featured a big three, which was brought together with such anticipation in the offseason, and they were floundering. The Wolves were 9-8 after a November 29th loss to Dallas in their first 17 games that essentially just treaded water. Something wasn't quite right, and it wasn't the personnel. The people on the roster seemed to be the right mix. KG was the leader, of course. Sam Cassell or Charles Sprewell were hired help thanks to offseason acquisitions. The role players were doing what Flip Saunders and the coaching staff wanted, but the big three seemed a bit lost, timid, unwilling to take charge. This needed to change. Sam Cassell, reflecting back, said, quote, "We didn't want to step on anyone's toes, so Flip pulled us in the office one day and said, we won't be successful until you guys, the big three, hold each other accountable, until you guys yell at each other." The three of us burst out laughing because it was the truth, and after that, it was over. It was as simple as bringing the truth out in the open. How does that land with you as you think about this year's team?
I think it's kind of perfect, right? I know we joked about having to do leadership power rankings in September because we had to fill the void. But now I'm starting to think that you and I were trendsetters in terms of kind of blazing the trail of who is, well, we talked about this on Monday too, but who is this team's voice during adversity? And I've always said, and I do believe this, whether it be basketball, your job, your family, like if you have to think about who is that leader or the hierarchy during adversity, during an emergency, during a bad time, then you're already effed. Like, you need to know that instinctively, that when things get really bad, like, I joke with my friends on the side, if the Wolves have a players-only meeting this season, who is going to hold it? And I think that's a really good question because I don't think you have an instant answer. And then fast forward to this morning, I know that shoot-around, clearly they lost since the last time you and I spoke to the Suns, but Dane Moore had a couple good quotes from Jalen Noel where he referred to Taurean Prince as the leader of the film room. And he said he's just calling everybody out, like whoever it is. Whether it's the number 1 guy or the number 15th guy, he's calling everybody out, and that's where you get the respect from everybody. I remember being at media or exit interviews right after they lost Game 6, Saturday morning earlier this year, and all the guys that came up answered a bunch of questions, and they all went out of their way differently without even being pressed to talk about how Taurean Prince was the bona fide leader. Like, you thought it was Pat Bev, he was the vocal one. But on the road, Taurean Prince would invite Nas and Jalen into the hotel room and not just talk about hoops and X's and O's, but like financial management, or you don't think you're getting paid enough. This is why you got to work harder to get that next deal. So it's kind of funny because we think about that 03-04 team. You and I talk about it damn near every week as almost just kind of being like, all you remember is perfect. It was the best year in Timberwolves history. But what this article shows you, Phil, is that they had their bumps and bruises, right? They had to kind of grind for a while, tread water, as the article says, to get to that level. And I think that's what we're kind of in now. It hasn't been fun. The Suns game was brutal. The Spurs game was unwatchable. But it might be some of those kind of dominoes that lead towards voices in that locker room starting to stand up a little more, because we talked about it. Who's going to fill Pat Bev's void? And maybe it's Taurean Prince. But I think this is a really big deal, and it's a really timely article to read and reflect on.
Yes, I think there's a lot of parallels here, but there's also a lot of key differences in that, okay, if Flip Saunders is going to call a come to Jesus meeting and bring especially Kevin Garnett and Sam Cassell in, and Spreewell too, and says, guys, I need you to lead.
Yep.
I need you
Take
to
over
get
the
after
locker room.
each other, and this is your deal. This is not, I can't fix this. This is your deal. Well, we know Kevin Garnett and Sam Cassell with championship pedigree as well, that those guys were alpha personalities with credibility, capable of doing that thing. And I think that's the biggest question. The fact that Taurean Prince is leading film sessions and that's awesome. But I think it also needs to come from the group of Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell, and or Anthony Edwards. And those guys don't have the same. Edwards might at some point. I still think he's immature and young and 21. I don't know that this is the year that he's going to say, all right, like Kevin Garnett at age 29 or whatever in 2003. All right, guys, I see the playing field clearly here. This is my deal. And I don't know that Gobert, Cat, and D'Lo have the credibility or the alpha personalities to do it. And that's what makes this a little bit different than the team from 18 years ago.
No, and that's fair. I think of Taurean Prince, again, the Wolves and the Warriors are two different franchises. I am well aware of that. But I do think Taurean Prince is kind of this team's Andre Iguodala in terms of that vet that all the guys respect. I still think back to when the Warriors made their finals run again last season. There was this video during the playoffs where Iguodala was on the bench and he sprinted off the bench to grab Wiggins on a free throw. Like, I think some other team was shooting free throws. And he kind of got in his ear and just kind of yelled at him. And it was like that point on, Wiggins averaged like 14 rebounds a game.
Yeah.
So I think Taurean Prince is kind of their Iguodala. But back to your point, the culture of the Warriors was still set by some combination of Steph, Clay, and Draymond. The culture now with Pat out and Vando out has to be, you still have to have the best, most talented, highest paid players speak up and lead. And that's the part I don't have an answer to yet. I don't know who outside of TP is willing to talk and can back it up by being a starter, scoring a lot of points, like being highly paid. So that remains to be seen. I know who I think it should be, but it remains to be seen if those people are actually going to fill the void.
Ant kind of disappointed me after that Suns game when he came out and there was a moment where he was looking at the box score and it was him sitting next to Jordan McLaughlin and Ant is looking at the box score for like 15 seconds or whatever while the media is kind of waiting. And he's had this wow moment of, oh, you guys off the bench were all plus 14, plus 12, plus 20 or whatever. And we were all minus as starters. And we will figure it out. We got to figure it out. But he also made a comment about being tired during that game against the Suns. And he's already had the comment, too, about being bad on back-to-backs. And so I will say from just a lead by example or just leadership perspective, the fact that, and he's 21, I get it, the fact that Anthony Edwards has already said that he's bad on back-to-backs and he's tired during a Suns game on national TV just raises a little red flag to me. Hey, guy, come on. This is your third year. You don't get to just be, why are you tired? 8th game into the season. So that disappointed me a little. I'll just throw that out there.
No, and you're right. And that's like the negative. The pro would be that he usually kind of, as he did a week ago when we talked about Popeye's Gate, he lets kind of this stuff just kind of go off his back. Like he doesn't worry too much. And he always says, I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. I think that's good leadership to be like, you know what? I'm not going to talk about it with you, but like we're going to figure this out.
Yeah, and he owns it too. You know, I need to do a better job. I need to.
Yep.
You shoulder blame, deflect credit. That's a good sign of leadership.
I think the prescription to remedy this, and it sucks, but the first 2 years we loved how Ant just told you everything. I always joked like I hope PR doesn't get to him and try to refrain him from just being who he is. He just tells you what's on his mind. I'm hungry. This is what I'm gonna eat. Like he tells you. We're probably getting to that phase now as a leader and as a franchise player that maybe he shouldn't tell you everything, right? We don't need to know all that stuff. If you are tired, that's not something you should say 8 games into the season, right? Yeah. Especially when the other day you're like, I'm in the best shape of my life. I added all this muscle. Watch all these videos I posted in the summer. So unfortunately for Ant to kind of take that next step, he might have to have some sort of governor on what he doesn't release to the public because in the past he's built this Q rating by just saying whatever's on his mind and everyone loves it. Well, again, twice in a week span, you can't be like, yeah, I've been eating, Popeyes and then I'm tired. Like you can't do that. But to his credit, I do think that when I like when he takes accountability, and that you don't see that a lot in professional athletes, especially 21-year-olds. So it's a mixed bag, and I think we're starting to see Ant learn about being a leader. Again, he had his first kind of off the court situation earlier this year and how he's handled that. So this might just all be, as that article referenced again, just a chapter in the book of this season and how this team hopefully kind of builds off of some of their mistakes and hiccups.
So I don't know where we're at in terms of the early season evaluation. I'm sure the Timberwolves, Chris Finch, and the front office had a plan of, okay, so based on everything that we've researched and studied and the practices in training camp, this is the starting 5. These are the rotations on paper. Let's roll it out and see what happens. And they haven't done a ton of tweaking. I mean, obviously the starting lineup has been the starting lineup. They've tried some different. There's been a couple injuries here and there, and they've tried some different combinations. But the first 8 games they start with the same 5. They largely finish with the starting 5, and there's been some varying results. Where do you think they're at in that process? Do you think they set out and said, all right, we got to go 15 games or 20 games with this starting 5? Or do you think based on some of the things we've seen, I mean, the glaring one that we've been out, congratulations to us, we're not right all the time, but we were out in front of this Jordan McLaughlin thing saying, boy, I mean, look at some of the lineup combinations. For me, it's very obvious. Jordan McLaughlin deserves as many minutes as you can give him, and as many minutes with Anthony Edwards as you can give him, because that's one of the best two-man pairings of anyone on the team so far. How close do you think they're getting to making some tweaks and changes here that maybe even could make egos and veterans uncomfortable? D'Lo, for instance.
I think I think it's a big month. November is for Chris Finch. We just talked about that article and that kind of players' own big three meeting with Flip. They're 9-8. That's 17 games. We're at 8 right now. So we've seen enough from Jordan McLaughlin to know he should play more. We've seen enough from Naz Reid to know that he should play more. And we've seen enough from Jalen Noel to know that he should play more. And it's starting to be like, there's rumblings of last week it was kind of like trade Carl, and now this week it's trade D'Lo.
Trade Gobert.
Right. As much as I love video games, as much as I love the Woj bombs and the notifications as well, I would bet my life that they don't trade anyone in November. And it just goes back to the fact that it's like December 8th or something is when all the guys that signed deals this summer are eligible to be traded. So why would you trade when 60% of the league is available instead of 100% of the league? It just gives you more opportunities. So I do, to answer your original question, think Finch, Tim Connolly, all the Avengers in the front office thought, okay, we have to just keep pushing square pegs through round holes for these first 15, 20 games. I don't think Chris Finch is trying to lose games in October, early November, but I necessarily don't think Chris Finch is also... I think he's shaving percentage points off of how much he's trying to win because he just wants to get enough sample size so that when he does make one of those hard decisions, which covering sports your whole life, could lead to political things behind the scenes and bruised egos and all that stuff, he can at least present them with, look at this, man, we got 20 games of sample size and it just didn't work. So we're going to pull the plug. If you pull the plug too early, it might give you a win or two here or there, but it's going to cause issue. Again, this is a marathon, and it is November 3rd. Like November is going to be a big month for Chris Finch to figure this out and to see who we can trust moving forward.
Yes, I will note. So I threw this tweet out yesterday, and it got some traction, just starting a conversation about lineup combinations. And I was looking at. This is ridiculous. I woke up yesterday and spent like an hour just going through lineup combinations, just laying in bed.
Oh, you're totally in it now. I love it. That's the best. Welcome to the club.
Like, how can we tweak this thing? What's going on? And this is a grain of salt for two reasons. Number one being sample size, 8 games, and number two being some of the lineups and combos that are performing better than others are also because they might be in against backups. The opponent puts backups in.
Yeah.
So you got to be a little careful with some of this. But it's very telling to me that of the Wolves' 5 best 3-man lineup combos, so this player on the court together, Jordan McLaughlin is part of the 3 best lineup combos. J-Mac, Jalen Noel, Taurean Prince is their best 3-man lineup combo. Some of this is because Taurean Prince is off to a torrid shooting start, too.
He's incredible.
So any combination he's part of includes like his 50% three-point rate to start the year. But that group is 40 points, plus 40 points per 100. But then the next groupings all have Ant and McLaughlin together. So I would look at some of these if I'm... This is me giving Chris Finch advice on how to coach and lineup combinations, but I think there's some things you can build off of here and say, all right, as we deconstruct this, there's clearly something with Jordan McLaughlin, and there's clearly something with Jordan McLaughlin and Anthony Edwards, and Jordan McLaughlin and Jalen Noel. These wing players that can score at different levels. Jordan McLaughlin is brilliant at setting those guys up in the best possible spot to get a mismatch or whatever it may be, right? So I would almost start there and say, okay, how can we get those guys together, those duos or those trios together for X amount of minutes per game? And if you can deconstruct it that way, if it happens to eat into like the starting lineup or whatever, I don't care. I'm not looking at this point. If I have to hurt D'Angelo Russell's feelings to get the best thing for the team, I'm kind of past that personally. But I also understand that you can't just make a decision without thinking about the consequences behind the scenes, or like the decision to take D'Lo and bring him down a peg or bench him or whatever should not be done lightly or flippantly. But I'm kind of done just appeasing egos at this point.
That's fair. And I think you hit the nail on the head. You said you're ready to do that. And so to answer your question a little earlier, I don't think they're ready to do that yet. Mm-hmm. But instead of worrying that they would never do it, we have that sample of Game 6 where when Finch was in a do-or-die situation, he just made the call, and he just put McLaughlin in. But I think, again, this is the last thing anyone wants to hear after a loss, but I think they're just going to double up this sample size so that they have enough data that shows. I mean, one of the things with this team right now is they can't shoot. Well, Jordan McLaughlin's shooting 16% from three. He's probably taken like a dozen shots. But so there are things that, his ceiling is not as high as what D'Lo's ceiling is. But now you're starting to navigate, okay, but is his floor a little higher than what D'Lo's floor is? Because D'Lo's floor at times can be really detrimental to the team. So I just think Finch is, back to your point, Finch has just got to say, okay, I'm going to do this until they get rid of me in Wolves coverage. He has all these ingredients, and it's like Jordan McLaughlin is, I don't know, the celery. It's like, okay, the celery doesn't go with the mashed potatoes, but it goes really well with this, and this, and we're just going to lean into more stuffing. We're just going to have more stuffing.
And we definitely like mashed potatoes, and we definitely want to include them.
But we're making
just
a
be kind
double
of a
batch
side,
of stuffing. Yes, exactly. So I think, and he has to do that, and it's the same with Nas. It's the same with Jalen. At some point, you have to just start to dance with the guys that got you there, and that's been my biggest critique with Finch is that he always goes back to that starting five to close games. And I think it's not because he's a bad coach or dumb. I just think he's trying to see square peg round hole. Can I figure out a way to make this work?
Yeah.
And if it's, if we're setting the table on whatever, November 27th or whatever, and it's still not working, he seems like a guy who is not scared of the egos, Phil. He will make the switch.
Yep. At some point, I would be curious if they deem this starting five to not be working at the level that they want. And it's not really to this point. It's not a train wreck, but
right.
Largely this starting five is getting outscored when they're on the court, and they could change that. It's early, but he's been very consistent with this group of five has played 122 minutes together. The next group of five has only played 14 minutes together. So this is the 5-man group that's on the court more than any other 5-man group. It's not even close. And so if you start to look, okay, Towns and Gobert, I'm not ready to say that Towns and Gobert don't work together. I think they might work together.
I think I've been more bullish on them after seeing it work out a little bit. Mm-hmm. It's surprising because we went into this thinking, okay, the offense is going to be humming in October. It's going to take a while to figure out the defense. I think so far defensive rating, they're 7th in the league. It's the defense that's been better and the offense that's stagnant. And that combined with one thing that, again, you and I have been right more than I thought we'd be. We just spent 12 minutes on Jalen Noel, Naz Reid, and Jordan McLaughlin. The depth that we predicted, this is the deepest team in franchise history. I'd be more concerned if the starting lineup couldn't figure it out, and then it was you, me, and Judd on the bench. That's not the case. They have real guys. Now you just got to figure out the different lineups and rotations.
Yes, and I think before you start to say at some point, well, Cat and Gobert, they're 2 7-footers. These idiots like Charles Barkley, they can't play together. Right. I would start to look at the pieces around them. Are the pieces around them complementing them in the way that they need to? So you look, Rudy Gobert I think he has the best rebounding rate in the NBA. He's doing it. Rudy Gobert is doing everything that you wanted him to. But the Wolves as a whole are a bad rebounding team so far this year. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's not Rudy Gobert's fault.
Right.
Jaden McDaniels is not really grabbing rebounds this season.
Correct.
Why not?
Right.
So I would shine a light on some other things here first. I mean, we already had the D'Angelo Russell conversation. Maybe Cat and Gobert don't work together with those other 3 guys that are in the starting lineup. Maybe that's what they deem at some point. Maybe they work better together when it's Jordan McLaughlin or it's Jalen Noel or Torian, whatever, right? So I'd like to see them move off of this 5 in some form at some point. Hey, Jaden, you're going to be a spark off the bench. Need you to be more attentive to rebounding and make a tweak here or there before I would say these 2 guys can't play together.
And that's because I am a Jaden McDaniels fan club card member.
Me too, by the way. Yeah.
No, and I don't think anything you said was untrue. He probably is the fall guy at some point. I know we really want to push Jordan McLaughlin in the starting lineup and put D'Lo on the bench. I wouldn't rule that out over an 82-game season. But to me, the likely move, if this continues to just tread water, for no better way to say it, is that TP gets inserted into the starting lineup and Jaden comes off the bench and kind of runs more with the Nas and the Jalen group. So, I mean, Chris Finch has options here, but I think you made a really good point too about like.
Thank you. By the way,
you're welcome. If the Gobert Towns thing, like I didn't check the numbers after the Suns game, but I still think at this point Carl's assisted on half of Rudy's made field goals, and then like more than the rest of the entire team. Like you got to get D'Lo and that Gobert pick and roll working. You got to get Jalen more pick and rolls with him. You got to get like Ant is just constantly waving Rudy off to set screens. It's like, no, Ant, if you have Rudy come up and set a screen, he's going to give you a longer runway to get to the paint and have your first dunk of the season. So that it's still a work in progress. We're going to be talking about this again. They're 4-4. They're probably going to be 9-8 in a couple weeks, and then Finch will have to call people into his office, and it'll be Ant, you, and me, and we'll figure it out. And then maybe they can kind of take off from there.
Yeah. How deeply, before I spring a game show on you here against your will, how deeply have you looked at some of the team stats in the last couple days?
I mean, I do technically have a day job, but that's really all I do. It's just like nerd out over stats and just click a bunch of filters.
So maybe you already know this, but I like to look. None of these are perfect, but I do like to look at some of the all-encompassing the stats like PER or win shares, the ones that kind of tell you like offensively, defensively, efficiency. You know, who are the best players, and like if you rank the NBA over the course of a full season sample size on win shares per 48, it's going to tell you pretty much who you think are the best players. Like Giannis is going to be number one, and Durant's going to be in the top 5. Who are the best 3 players on the Timberwolves this season according to win shares per 48? And if you already know this, that's okay. You can just show off and give me the answer.
Know this off the top of my head, but I'm gonna say, Jalen, Nas, and Carl.
You got one of them.
Oh boy, that's not good.
Nas has been. It's a small sample. It's only 65 minutes, but Nas is number 1.
Okay.
He's been that effective in his limited playing time. Jalen Noel's actually been the third worst player, but not bad. It's not. Yeah. He's not been shipwrecking anything. I think it's part of it's just he hasn't knocked down shots yet. Mm-hmm. He's going to shoot closer to 40% from 3. Mm-hmm. He's really struggling shooting right now. I don't think that's going to continue. So that's part of it. The other 2 are Rudy Gobert doing his job. Rudy Gobert is doing his job, and Taurean Prince, and then Cat is 4th right now.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's interesting. And that was win shares per 48?
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This podcast can't go on for 6 hours, but we could just talk about Nas for 6 hours. I just am so impressed by him. And whether it be Nas in the front court or Jordan McLaughlin in the back court, you and I have come to an agreement that these guys just have to be staples of the rotation. But also we're basketball fans in general, and anyone listening to this knows you're not going to beat the Grizzlies in a 7-game series if your bread and butter is Jordan McLaughlin, Nas Reed pick and roll, right? Like that's the sky or the sunroof to a really nice car. Like, man, we have a great sunroof, but if we don't have the engine working and we don't have power steering, like we're screwed. So they still need to find a way to make those 4 or 5 guys that are staples of the starting lineup work. But I didn't think TP would even be in there, but I guess Jordan. Do you say Jordan McLaughlin's in there too? What was that?
He's got like middle of the pack here.
Okay.
I closed out here to get into some other stuff. Well, actually, Jordan, the middle, like the next chunk includes. Let's see here. So Cat is in the 4, and then Kyle Anderson hasn't really played. He's played like 50 minutes, but Jade McDaniels, Jordan McLaughlin, Jalen Noel, and then the 2 worst in terms of the regular rotation have actually been D'Lo and Anthony Edwards.
Yep,
and in large part because he's had like 3 just atrociously inefficient games, and he also sometimes gets put in the spin cycle with some of it's his fault, some of it's just the group that's on the floor where we're just like getting run out of the gym defensively for 10 minutes or something. So
I think that stat tells me more than anything a topic that no one's talking about too much is that I think Rudy Gobert's left a little meat on the bones. He still occasionally finishes with like a finger roll rather than just dunking the ball. There's still maybe a couple too many post-ups, but by and large, like he's gobbling up a ton of rebounds, and he's protecting the rim, and he's setting massive screens. So far, I've actually really liked what Rudy's given them, but I just think they got to find better ways to utilize him, and that does start with the backcourt, because as much as we want to harp on D'Lo, and I think it's well-deserved, if you're a D'Lo fan, you point to his partner and you say, well, Ant's been pretty bad too. And you just said it, like some of these games he's been so inefficient and so going back to that Spurs game, you can't not score in the first half. Like you just can't do that when you touch the ball so much. So work in progress for them as well, but they got to find a way to jumpstart that.
One thing about D'Lo, I mean, the thing, I guess, about D'Lo is that, and I bought into this. I did. Is that he was supposed to be the glue to all of this. That, all right, pick and roll, boom, this is going to be great for you. You're going to have to be the straw that stirs the drink, moving the ball around, and then once the ball comes back around to you, you're going to knock down shots. Like those are kind of the three big check boxes. Facilitate a great pick and roll game, get everyone involved as the point guard, and then knock down shots and just be a guy that can kind of take over at times. And he's really done none of those three things in the first three games. And I even went on NBA.com just to find out how effective has he been as a ball handler in pick and roll, points per possession. So it doesn't tell the whole story, but D'Lo ranks 46th among ball handlers in the NBA so far in pick and roll points per possession. He's not very good. And he's not consistent. You can't just like not show up for the first 10 games and then say, oh, you know what? I'll be around for the next 5. Don't worry about it. No, dude.
Well, I know preseason is its own kind of beast, but we watched all those preseason games, and I was just floored by how easily he got to the rim. I kept saying like he was 80% of his shots in these games were at the rim, which was completely different than what we've seen from him before. And obviously teams tighten up those rotations and those defensive schemes when the regular season kicks off. But, yeah, it just hasn't even looked – I thought the preseason looked promising with him and Rudy, and it hasn't looked like that. And he's not taking a lot of threes. And it's just – like I think in that not to compare anyone to Chris Paul, but I'm pretty sure in that Suns game, Chris Paul had like 12 assists and 1 turnover. And then D'Lo had 4 assists and 4 turnovers, and Ant wasn't any better. But it's just like that's a big deal when you can have a 12-to-1 assist to turnover ratio rather than 1-to-1. And again, he just needs to, I don't know if it's trust himself more or trust Finch's system, but they're not getting. I think the Timberwolves backcourt in general has probably been the most alarming thing, because I think since we talked last week and since the whole Popeyes thing, like Carl's actually started to figure it out a little more. He had a really good game, I thought, against Phoenix, like 27, 10, 4, efficient shooting. He's making better passes. Kevin Harlan, as we talked about earlier, is a GOAT, but Stan Van Gundy was really complimenting Carl on some of the reads he had, and so that's starting to come too, and maybe we're wrong. Like maybe Carl is the glue now. They said that he could lead the team in assists. I think he's like 5.5 a game, and D'Lo's 5.8, so maybe he is a facilitator.
Tim Connolly's vision is it's different rosters, but that there's a Jokic. I mean, he can pass, he can shoot. Sure. There's a Jokic level in there somewhere. Some of this is a good segue into Phil and Kyle read the comments here. So we can always take your questions, your comments, your concerns, critiques, your theories on basketball or life or whatever via the SKOR North app. There's a feedback tab that you can just send us stuff. And also we're always reading and scanning the YouTube comment section and Twitter. But this is a great question from Charlie Buckets on the SKOR North YouTube channel. Please click subscribe and the like button to spread the word here. He says, why hasn't Anthony Edwards dunked at all this year? And I was like, well, that's a little bit hyperbolic, isn't it? Come on. Like he's thrown a couple down, hasn't he?
Right.
Okay, so Anthony Edwards in the first 2 years of his career had 128 dunks, according to Basketball Reference.
Mm-hmm.
He has no dunks through the first leg of the season here. Anthony Edwards has not dunked a basketball yet. Isn't that kind of weird?
So
has he passed up opportunities for is he just laying it up sometimes? I mean,
someone sent me a similar question about that on Twitter, and then they gave me what I would deem was maybe one of the spicier takes ever, but it was that doctors advised Ant to not dunk as much so that he could protect his knees a little more. I have no idea if that makes any sense to any of the doctors listening, but it was good enough to make me think like, damn, that's a really good point. I don't think
you might land weird if you throw it down or something.
I guess. I don't know. I mean, that's probably why you and I stopped dunking, was to protect our knees.
That's exactly why I did. Yes, yeah. And you can break a finger on the rim too.
Right. And
for me, I broke my elbow on the rim one time. I mean, I get up. So
on the Fisher Price, I thought they're made of plastic. I don't really think it's anything more than just a random outlier. I could see him have 6 dunks on Friday against the Bucks. But there is a little to the fact that there's more cloggedness in the paint. Like Rudy Gobert, when Ant drives to the basket, Rudy Gobert is just mentally trained to like clean up messes. So he's like, okay, well, if Ant goes up to finish and he doesn't lay it in right, then I'll just tap it in. But the problem is that when Rudy goes closer to the basket, he brings his guy closer to the basket. And now Ant sees all this weight and height. And he's like, well, I don't know if I can do this. And then he kind of contorts his body and tries to finish. So,
Yeah.
But I go back to, I said this to Dane earlier in the week. There's no way Tim Connelly and those guys and Sashin and all these didn't think of that, right? They didn't think of this summer like, okay, we got this kid who loves to attack the basket. What if we just put a couple cell towers in the lane? Is that going to affect him? I got to believe they have some ways to fix that and get around that. But Anthony Edwards dunking is a big part of his game. It leads to and one. It also just like energizes that team. It's a big play for them. And that's probably maybe the most, go find a more shocking stat than Ant having 0 dunks through 8 games.
It's bizarre.
Can't find one.
It is bizarre. There's a couple other weird Ant stat quirks. He's shooting 50% on corner threes so far this year. I think it's kind of a small sample.
Okay.
But the good news is he's taking more shots percentage-wise at point-blank range, so inside 3 feet as classified, than at any point in his career. Like 1/3 of his shots are coming at the rim. So he's either just choosing to go for layups instead for different reasons that you may or may not have mentioned, or he's making I don't know, maybe he's making a concerted effort to not dunk because of injury risk. I don't know.
Maybe in that old age of 21, he's already trying to kind of take care of his body. But no, I think they got to find a way to unleash that because for better or worse, this kid's signed here. Well, for better, but he's signed here for the likely next decade. And you got Rudy Gobert on the same team. So, but in the same vein, I watched Donovan Mitchell dunk the ball a lot, and his teammate was Rudy Gobert. So it can't just be Ants. Kind of back to you can't always be tired. It can't just be that there's big guys in the lane because you've dunked over those big guys before. Anthony Edwards has dunked on Rudy Gobert. Yeah. So just, I don't know, pretend he's not on your team. Just try to jump over him. It's fine.
Exactly. Mike T chiming in here via the SKOR North app. He says, listening to Flagrant Howls from earlier this week, love the Timberwolves discussion. Could you and Kyle explain to a basketball noob like me, why can't you play Jordan McLaughlin more minutes? Why isn't he a full-time point guard? We love to use stats to back up takes. The stats bear out that this team plays better with him on the court compared to D'Lo. It can't be because he's not a big name. Give me the productive player over the marquee name any day. Does the organization get embarrassed that a big acquisition doesn't work? D'Lo's been an overall disappointment. So the general question here is, why do you have to limit Jordan McLaughlin's minutes?
I mean, there is credence to the idea, right, in any sport that sometimes you just look a little better against. I mean, Jordan McLaughlin's minutes have usually come against second-tier guys, like bench guys. That's a thing. You should give him more minutes, but I do think there is. Remember when we talked about like the top 22 or whatever point guards and D'Lo wasn't in there? I mean, at some point he becomes a defensive liability too, even though I know D'Lo is not necessarily Tony Allen, but you just got to kind of figure out that every night then he's going to be going up against, is Jordan McLaughlin going to have the energy to do what he does or the ability to do what he does if he has to guard De'Aaron Fox or he has to guard John Morant? I mean, you sometimes want to, you can't just have your pitcher throw 102 for 9 straight innings. Yeah. You got to have, those matchups so that Jordan McLaughlin can kind of take advantage of being a better 2 than your team's 2. But if you try to put your team's 2 against their 1, it's just, you're going to run into issues. So yes. I do think he needs more minutes, but there is like some logic to the fact of D'Lo still has a higher ceiling and a little better ability to guard some of these guys, even if it looks bad. And you have to have him out there, at least for now, to kind of stem the tide.
Yeah, I think...
But it's a good question, though.
It is. You could throw Tyus Jones into this, too. Because
exactly. It's
a quintessential backup point. Although, in fairness, when John Morant was out...
He was good, yeah.
They won, like, every game, and Tyus Jones played 30-plus minutes or whatever. But the league and the market haven't dictated that he is a starting caliber point guard because he's still a backup. But here's my thought on it. I think you nailed some of it. If Jordan McLaughlin, so he's playing 17 minutes a night right now. Mm-hmm. A large chunk of those minutes are against backups or against heavy backup lineups. It's not always as black and white as it's not like shift changes in hockey where now the backups come in. So oftentimes it's blended lineups, but you're facing a larger percentage of backup lineups in the 17 minutes he's playing because he's not starting the game, right? So if you were to give him 15 extra minutes a game or 20 extra minutes a game, get him up into like the 30, 35 minute mark, it's going to come against better players. So you're going to expose him to that. Also, he's not a very good shooter. You know, for his career, he's even like below league average as a 3-point shooter. And he's not going to create a lot of offense any other place on the court himself. Like he's not a guy that's going to go and get you 20 or 25 points. So when he's on the court, it's even more pressure on everyone else to score points. So that's a thing. I'm not saying it can't work, but it's a thing. And then the other thing I would point to is he's 5'11", D'Lo is 6'4", and the Wolves love just having length on defense.
And that was my point.
Hands in passing lanes, rebounding, just everything. And so if you put a 5'11" guy out there for 35 minutes versus 17 minutes, does he get overexposed? Are opposing teams going to be able to sort of, take advantage of the lack of height there? I'm not saying that these are reasons to not try, but these are some of the reasons why he has not to this point. Yeah. He's not the most like athletic, dynamic guy either. So,
Well, there's a reason that the sixth man of the year comes off the bench, right? Like sometimes those guys are just better suited to go get buckets or defend against second tier guys.
Like Russell Westbrook, future sixth man, almost had a triple double in like
he looked good coming off the bench.
26 minutes, and he had like a triple double. And
but the Tyus one is a really good comp, but it's also kind of an outlier because I think Tyus is maybe a more generic brand starter than he is. I mean, he's just a better player than Jordan McLaughlin, but he gets paid more. So the Wolves got a nice deal with J-Mac. But Jordan McLaughlin falls into like the Shabazz Napier bucket. He had a stint here in Minnesota. Or some of these other, like Campaign, who they just played against the Suns. Campaign was drafted really high. He's not a starting point guard, but he is a really solid backup point guard, and sometimes that's just a thing. So to that question, he has to play more. They got to find ways to, kind of acclimate him in more with maybe 3 starters or like Ant and Carl and some bench guys. But the physical frame of him is what holds him back. It's probably also why Jalen Noel, as much as I want to like be his agent, probably is like a more suited for a elite bench role than a starter, because at some point just your stature and your height and your weight and your lack of wingspan does affect your ability to defend, even if you have the heart of a lion. So good question, but play him more, but I just don't know if he can ever be the actual starter for this team.
Yeah, that's fair. It'd be nice if just from a human dynamic standpoint, you could say, you know what? All right, so egos aren't going to be bruised, but Jordan, you're going to play 27 minutes now, and D'Lo is going to be the punch off the bench with the second unit or something, but I just don't know that.
I got to go back and look at this, but someone texted me that they're like, remember when Finch convinced D'Lo to come off the bench for a little bit and Ricky Rubio was starting? And I can't remember how many games that was, but I do remember that being a thing.
Yeah.
And now that, and I was thinking about, because I'm such a degenerate and my brain sucks, that I was watching that Lakers game last night and I was like, man, they really did get Westbrook to come off the bench and look really good. And then D'Lo looked really good with the second unit guys last year. I was like, put a pin in that. Put a pin in that.
That's interesting. And that's where, as a head coach, you got to be good at X's and O's, but a lot of it's just like the Flip Saunders anecdote from the beginning of the show, right? It's about leveling with humans with huge contracts and egos, and getting them to do what you want and play within a team construct. Actually, we were talking off mic as I slapped my mic in the face here out of excitement. I was watching the Redeem Team documentary or movie on Netflix last night. So good. If you guys, the audience, if you haven't seen that yet,
must watch.
It's a look back at the 2008 Olympic gold medal winning team, USA basketball, that, a section of that team got beat and embarrassed in 2004, and then they also lost in the World Championships a couple times in and around that too. And a big chunk of the documentary was about, a lot of it was about Kobe and how Kobe was trying to rehab his entire image with the league, and he didn't have any friends or anything, and it was like the softening of Kobe Bryant for the first time. But also it was about how Mike Krzyzewski, noted college basketball coach, was appointed as the guy to save USA basketball, and how he went about, from a human connection standpoint, building relationships and respect with all these big egos and Hall of Fame players, LeBron and Wade and Kobe and all these guys. And it really is. I mean, this is where Chris Finch is going to have his work cut out for him. It's things aren't going the way that you wanted, which rarely happens. Like, you're going to have to make some adjustments, and it's not going to be about necessarily drawing something different up on a whiteboard. It might be about leveling with humans and having conversations about leadership and effort and things like that. So,
and that's why I will make November Chris Finch month, because we all know how he came in and replaced Ryan Saunders, and it was just literally in the middle of the night. And he was just kind of like this shaggy haired guy, like, I don't know what's going on. I'm just like going to play some guys. And like, he had a really cool bravado about him, and it really worked. And then it translated into the last season, and it really worked. But him too. And by the way, like, if anyone even remotely is like thinking about firing Chris Finch, just like block me, like, get away from me. I hate you.
Yeah. No.
But I do think this is the first time that guy's really had expectations with his with his role. And just like some of these other guys, like, real expectations, not just like, hey, can you break the playoff drought streak? Like, we're talking second, third round stuff. So it's going to be interesting. I really do think that you can come up with 42 different storylines to focus on this month. But to me, it's going to be Chris Finch. It's going to be, does he finally crack the glass and not close with the same guys he started with?
Yeah.
Does he lean into the hot hand approach? And how does he manage? Because I always try to stress this. Like, we watch basketball, the Wolves, 82 games a year for 2 hours, and then mostly we're just kind of on Twitter or whatever. Those guys are like, show up to the office every morning, and then they interact, and they sit in a meeting room, they sit on the practice court, and then they go have the cafeteria. Like, they're on the plane. Like, they interact so much that you have to finesse those relationships. It's way more than what we see on TV, and that's why it's so much harder to just like, okay, D'Lo's pissing me off, I got to put Jordan McLaughlin in. Like, you can't make those rash decisions early on, because it can actually be more detrimental long-term, even if it benefits you short-term.
Maybe Finch needs to appeal to egos a little bit. There was an anecdote from Krzyzewski in which
That's such a good doc.
They were approaching the 2008 Olympics. It was right before they started playing games in the actual. So they had kind of built up this team over like 3 summers, and now they are about to go play actual Olympic games in China. And he sits the team down beforehand, and he starts telling a story about how, guys, I'm a grandpa. I've got grandkids. And, they sit on my lap and they ask me about, hey, what is dad, grandpa, what do you do? I'm a college basketball coach. And they start asking questions about, did you ever win a championship, whatever. He says, someday you guys are all going to be a bunch of granddaddies, a bunch of grandpappies, and your little granddaughter or grandson's going to hop up, sit on your lap, and they're going to ask you about that time you played in the Olympics. And they're going to say, Grandpa, what happened? What happened in the Olympics? And what are you going to say back to them? Are you going to say, well, we lost to that Greek team? And then the story's over, and then they just go to Grandma? He goes, how do you want that story to go with your grandkids? It's like, oh, man, run through a wall.
Yeah, I'm ready to run through a wall. Isn't Coach K, like, unemployed? They should maybe just have him come speak to the team.
They should, yeah.
That might be the answer.
Listen, Carl, Rudy, people are going to ask, that one time where the Timberwolves traded for 2 7-footers, how did that season play out? Well, we got to the play-in as the 9 seed, and then we got beat by the Pelicans, and then they traded everyone.
We just got to get Carl and D'Lo and Rudy to sit on Coach K's lap, and we'll figure it out. That doc was so good, and you're right, that little moment, there's so much good footage that you've never seen before. And again, I know you're with me on this, we're sickos together, but I just am so into like that behind the scenes, like the kind of subconscious or the psychological stuff that goes into playing sports. Because again, it's more than the 2 hours you see warming up and playing a game and icing your legs. There really is some ego and politics and, personality that goes into this. And I think that's what we're starting to navigate with this team in November is, okay, it didn't start as well as you thought. Some of that's on us, right? They shouldn't be 7-1. Like, there's really good teams they've played. I mean, they've beat the Thunder, and the Thunder have beaten everyone. But now you're kind of hit some adversity. It's getting a little colder. Teams are starting to figure it out a little more. What are you going to do to pivot now as, your competition is starting to get tougher?
Amen. So, all right. Well, this is probably a good stopping point here before we, get too far down the road of just playing Jordan McLaughlin for all 48 minutes.
Yeah.
So we'll let them play a couple more games, And we'll be back with a couple episodes next week of Flagrant Howls, as we still would like the Timberwolves to win 50 games. Mathematically, it's a little more challenging when you're only 500 after your first 8, but it is still very much possible. So, all right, he's Kyle. I'm Phil. Thanks for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time.